And part of
Exactly.
why it felt so important to share it is because it's very hard to be on this planet for a lot of people, and we have to piece together all of these resources and tools. And a lot of people don't have time for therapy, or they don't have the financial resources to work at their lives.
To me, that was exactly what your book did. Like I would recommend this book to someone who doesn't know their problems yet, like knows that something is wrong, but they are not like fully aware. Because it is a guide. Like you can, there's chapters on so many things that you can identify where exactly you're struggling, and then go after more information about it. But this has to be presented to people, because they don't have any idea what the problem is. Hello, everybody. Today I have a super special video for you guys. I had an amazing conversation with this recently published author, Shauna Reiter. She wrote the book, You Are the Boss of You. It talks about perfectionism, boundaries, advocating for yourself. So I just wanted to share with you guys this amazing conversation that we had. And yeah, hopefully help you become the boss of you and the best version of yourself. First of all, how did you come up with the idea? Have you been like wanting to write this book for a long time?
I haven't been wanting to write the book for a long time, but I've been living the book in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that all of the advice I'm giving to readers, I've been giving to myself and friends for
Yeah.
many, many years as I've kind of cultivated these tools and strategies and experimented with different therapeutic methods. This has actually been my life, the scaffolding of
Mm-hmm.
my life. So it was easy in some sense to translate it into book form because I've been living it. I'd written the
Yeah.
memoir first and realized after writing the memoir that the beauty of memoir is that in a sense it lets people know they're not alone.
Yeah.
So I do hope to publish that book next. But what the
Mm-hmm.
memoir didn't do is create practical, actionable understandings of how to do
Yeah.
it. And so after writing the memoir, I realized, you know what? I owe it to people to share what I've learned over the years, all of the wisdom that I've cultivated, because I've had access to tremendous resources in terms of therapeutic
Yeah.
communities and just time to really dig deep and excavate my
Mm-hmm.
soul. And it felt important to sort of pay
To
that,
share.
yeah, and give
Yeah.
that to others who
And you did this
don't.
so well. Like I felt like I was in a therapy session. Like every chapter felt like a therapy session.
Thank you. Oh, I'm
But
so
it's true.
glad. And
Yeah.
actually, I want to have deeper conversations with people about each chapter of the book. I mean, I could have written an individual book for every single chapter I wrote.
Yeah.
I felt like I had so much more to say. And my
Uh-huh.
dream in some, fictitious scenario that I hope to manifest practically in real life, I would be sitting down with groups of people, chapter by chapter, and really exploring these themes in detail because there's so much more to say. And for
Yeah.
instance, when it comes to creating boundaries, this is a conversation I'm having with my friends on a daily basis. This is a conversation
Mm-hmm.
I'm having with myself on a daily basis.
And this is global, let me say, because like I have experience like in France, in Brazil, and this is everywhere. People are, I think, now learning that we need to set the boundaries. Nobody's going to magically understand what
Yeah.
they, where's the line for us. So um yeah, I think it was a great chapter, and you a very important conversation to have.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and it's interesting
Yeah.
how even in our own lives, sometimes we repeat the same lessons over and over again. Like for
Yeah.
me in particular with creating boundaries, I've gotten frustrated with myself over the years because I feel like I've learned a lesson theoretically because it didn't
But
work
not in
out.
fit.
And then, but things not working out doesn't necessarily provide resolve for the
Yeah.
future. So I have found
Yeah.
myself kind of recreating circumstances that are very much rooted in trauma, where I then have to learn the lesson all over again, but implement, a firmer sense of self. And
Yeah.
little by little, I feel like I'm getting to a point now where I recognize it just doesn't feel good to suffer after not creating
Yeah.
a boundary, whatever that boundary
Yeah.
is for you. And
Hmm.
so I'm sort of reminding myself of that feeling and going like, gosh, I remember how bad it felt when I didn't follow my gut or my intuition, or I said
Yeah.
yes when I wanted to say no, or I showed up at that place and really wasn't comfortable. And I'm just kind of tapping into that feeling first,
Yeah.
And it's
Hmm.
inspiring me to be a little bit firmer with
Yeah.
boundaries.
You reminded me of something that Brené Brown used to say, that it's better to choose discomfort than resentment, because
Oh,
it
I
is
love
discomfort,
that.
you know.
Oh,
It's not.
that is just genius. I'm gonna write
Yeah.
that down. Actually, I might make wallpaper of it. We can always count on Brene Brown for like a
Yes.
miraculous quote. Everything that comes out of her mouth is quote worthy. But that
Yeah.
it's so true. And it's gonna be uncomfortable, Larissa. I mean, that's the thing
Yeah.
I think we all need to get really comfortable with is that
Yeah.
it's going to be uncomfortable and that we
True.
don't have to wait until it feels comfortable to do the thing we know
Yeah.
we need to do for ourselves. We need to
Yeah.
learn how to
I think.
self-soothe in the midst of the discomfort and then take
Yeah.
action to move forward.
Yeah, and that's it's another thing that I loved in your book. How you kind of help us understand how to soothe ourselves and care for this inner child, because I think most people don't know how to soothe themselves because nobody did this to them when they were kids. They just, oh, mom and dad just says, oh, suck it up, stop crying. And so we never learn how to comfort ourselves, when we need. So I think that chapter was brilliant. And tell us a little bit more, like what for someone who didn't read the book, like how can they start taking better care of themselves, and uh, yeah.
Well,
I think you
it's
got.
so simple, really. And I feel like so many of the principles that are actually the most helpful in our lives are underestimated and overlooked because of their simplicity. It's like we feel like we should know it already because it's so childlike and basic
Yeah.
that we gloss over it. But really, it started kind of coming into focus for me when I had children and was soothing them in these very clear ways. Like, wow, you're having a really hard time right now. Are you angry? It looks like you need to take a deep breath. Like, these are the ways that we speak to ourselves when we're
Yeah, but we
uncomfortable
don't.
or scared. No, we don't, because oftentimes our caregivers were overwhelmed when we were
Yeah.
children. And so
Yeah.
because they didn't just take a pause, I mean, we're also so busy now on our phones and computers and devices and work and, you know, parents are working while trying to parent and we're not in community often in the ways that
Yeah.
people are in other cultures where we can rely on aunts and cousins and friends to pitch in. So there's this huge, the onus is on us. There's this huge burden to do everything. And then we get overwhelmed and don't really take the pause that's needed to
True.
just sit down. It takes 30 seconds to sit down and take a deep breath and say, hey, gosh, this is hard. Like you're hurting, you're
Yeah.
having a really rough time. And since most of our parents didn't do that for us because it wasn't modeled for them, we're just perpetuating the cycle, but in a
Yeah.
society that's exponentially more complicated in certain ways because of the digital
Yeah.
world and the number of distractions we have. But I also think societally, like our fathers and their fathers were taught to just shut down and shut out
Yeah.
all of
That's
the,
what I they taught us.
yeah, it's like buck up, be strong, you're tough, you can do
Yeah.
this because in a way, like they knew how hard life was. Many of them fought wars, and
Yeah.
you have to build resilience to keep going. But what's counterintuitive and the truth is that building resilience comes from accessing our vulnerability. So we get stronger and tougher, not when we tell ourselves everything is okay when it's not when we say you're fine, you're comfortable when you're uncomfortable. The
Yeah.
resilience piece is actually allowing ourselves to access our deeper emotions, to be uncomfortable, to have some version of a tantrum within ourselves, and then provide the comfort and the
Yeah.
soothing. It's not eliminating the fear, the displeasure, the pain, all of the frustration. It's not eliminating it and bypassing it. It's actually getting in the trenches and knowing that you're okay and will
Yeah.
come out the other side. That's how we build resilience. Not
Yeah, I love it when you say in the
preventing or
book that we
avoiding.
have to feel the pain. The pain doesn't go away if you don't feel it.
It really doesn't. And I mean, I think there are two parts to this. I think that there are a couple of layers to the healing process, at least for me. How it's gone is I need to first excavate my soul and dig deep to
Mm-hmm.
access those underlying emotions. And then I need to build, and which I have been doing and continue to do, we all need to build then the awareness of when we're falling into a trap. Meaning, when we've habituated to certain ways of thinking and feeling and being, it's easy to revert to pain,
Yeah.
and stress, and discomfort and negativity because it's what we're used to, because it's
Familiar.
familiar. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's different from feeling your feelings, right? Like we feel our feelings and learn to comfort ourselves and then hopefully come out the other side and rinse and repeat as we go through any given day, right? Because
Yeah.
this is just life. This is the process of life. It's going to continue to feel sticky and we're going to continue to overcome and resilience will build and you'll find over time that as you continue on with this process, you feel like you're able to buffer more stress and more anxiety. But that doesn't mean necessarily wallowing indefinitely in uncomfortable feelings because that's what we're used to. You know, there's
Yeah.
a certain point at which we do need to build new habits. And, you know, what wires together fires together. We've all heard this, you know, in regard to neuroscience, that our brain is
Hmm.
creating neural pathways, right? And we reinforce those neural pathways based on how we choose to think about ourselves and our lives and the story we're telling ourselves about what's going on for us. So it's very important to recognize what those go-to thoughts are so you can change them. So you
Yeah.
can bring awareness into your everyday thoughts and attitudes and go, wow, like every time I start to feel good about myself, I shoot myself down because there's this underlying narrative that I'm not good enough, or I believe I'm not
Hmm.
worthy of happiness, or I believe I deserve pain, right? And so that awareness piece is huge because it
Yeah.
gives us the opportunity to start creating long-term habits about how we think about ourselves in the world that will ultimately serve us and nourish our hearts. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I love you mentioned self-awareness. I love like everything you said about this in the book as well because it's the beginning. I think that the self-awareness is the beginning of healing. There's no healing if you don't realize what's going on with yourself. So, yeah, like this was one of the questions I was going to ask you, but I think you agree with me, that like if someone would start in this healing process, what would be your first advice? Like where to start?
Well, we always need to start with the breath because when we take a deep breath, it takes us out of fight or flight and
Hmm.
into the parasympathetic nervous system where we can really begin to see what's true, you know, where we can
Hmm.
begin to decipher between real stress and perceptions of stress that aren't
Hmm.
necessarily serving us, right? Because stress is healthy to some degree, obviously. Stress
It's
inspires us to
necessary.
grow and evolve and achieve and all of these things. And it activates chemicals that are very healthy. What happens to us often over time is that we have so much stress that goes unmanaged that we then become overwhelmed. And that anxiety can ultimately lead to depression, which is a really
Yeah.
vicious cycle, right? So it's not that stress is bad, it's that sometimes we don't know how to manage it. And then it becomes like a mountain and overwhelms us. So the first step, I believe, is always to pause and breathe. Um,
Hmm.
and in that pause, we build in the mindfulness, which
Hmm.
is really becoming aware of what we're feeling,
Hmm.
then inviting compassion.
Hmm.
So if we are aware of what we're feeling, but then we're critical of ourselves because we don't agree that we should be feeling that feeling, or we feel like we should be over it by now, or we're too
Yeah.
old to be having these feelings and experiences because these are very juvenile thoughts to be having, or these feelings feel very young,
Yeah.
that's not going to help us either. I mean, in
Yeah.
my book about, excuse me, in the chapter I write about softening perfectionism, one of the things I say
Oh my God, that was my favorite.
One of the things, mine too, we can come back to that. One of the things I say is that the way out of perfectionism isn't to judge ourselves. It's not to beat
Yeah.
ourselves up. Like we don't grow and we don't evolve by being hard on ourselves and
Yes.
punishing ourselves. But often that's kind of our go-to instinct. It's like, oh God, you're so
Exactly.
weak, or like, why are you so stupid? It's like the way we talk to ourselves. If anyone on the street were to hear us talk to a child that way, they would be
Yeah.
calling social services. I mean,
Yes,
it's mean, it's ugly, it's criminal. We wouldn't treat other humans that way. So why do we treat
it's
ourselves that
true.
way? to soften it by really cultivating an inner dialogue and an inner voice that's kind and compassionate and caring and
Yeah.
tender and that goes, wow, you are struggling, you are so overwhelmed. Let's take this down a notch by
Yeah.
breathing and reminding ourselves that we're loved and that we're safe and that our life has meaning and purpose and that we're needed here on the planet. So I
Yeah.
think the mindfulness piece is a very good starting point for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And talking about perfectionism, again, this point that you say that is not the like getting harder on yourself is not the way out of perfectionism. This has been my whole life. Like I connected with that. So in such a deep level, you have no idea.
May I interrupt you? What are you scared of without thinking? Like, just what are you
Ah,
scared of?
judgments, putting the book out and for people to judging it and, giving bad reviews and all that.
Yeah, and I think that what this speaks to so deeply, Larissa, is at the heart of our fear is the sense of wanting to belong and to be accepted.
Yeah.
When that is at risk, when we fear losing acceptance and support, it's terrifying. And
Yeah.
I know what I've done over the years is I've conflated, in many ways, what I create and what I project into the world with who I am fundamentally. And that
Hmm.
never works. And the reason that doesn't work is because one has nothing to do with the other, right?
Hmm.
A very dear friend said to me in my 20s when I was really struggling with low self-esteem and insecurities and just judging myself so harshly, comparing myself to other people in ways that were really negative and destructive. He said to me, "You're irreplaceable. There's no other you. And if you did nothing else for the rest of your life but exist, it's
You'll
enough."
be enough. Yeah.
Enough. And so if we realize, and not just realize in a cognitive way in our minds, but if we feel in our souls that fundamentally we are enough because we have value, because we're here and exist, imagine what a load that would lift. Imagine what
Freedom.
a burden that would have had. Freedom. Hallelujah. I mean, imagine the deep breath we would all take if we believed that we were enough, right? Because if
Yeah.
you believe you're enough in the seat of your soul, if you have that belief, it doesn't matter what you write. It could be crappy. It could not make sense. It could be like a really sloppy first draft, as all first drafts tend to be.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't feel like a reflection of ourselves. It wouldn't
Yeah.
feel like a reflection of our fundamental soul or being or
Yeah.
identity. It would simply be what it is, a first draft, a sloppy first
Yeah.
draft. So if we stop taking things so personally and making it all about us, because it's not.
Yeah.
It's just something
Yeah.
you're creating, but it's not about you fundamentally in terms of your value, your inherent worth. I think we would all have a lot more freedom, and then things would just start to flow. Because if
Yeah.
you write on
That's exactly what happens. Like when I relax, I write.
Right.
It's like this always.
So what gets you over the hump of that judgment? What
Allowing myself, like literally shutting off my brain and allowing myself to just write. That's
right.
always what gets me going.
Like shutting down the left hemisphere and just activating the right hemisphere.
Yeah.
I
And
like to
right
light a
now, like I
candle.
already have some tricks to do that. So, like I have specific songs, specific settings, that helps me, But sometimes I struggle like really bad with that.
It's interesting that you talk about music because I feel like when it comes to memories, music is such a direct access point, right? Like
Yeah.
the senses give us direct access, I feel,
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
parts of us that are really, really deep. And so, like, I light a candle because the smell of the candle I light, it gets me in my right hemisphere fast.
Uh-huh.
The senses, I feel like, are really important. What's tactile,
Yes.
what we can touch, what we can taste. I mean, I also eat a lot of chocolate while I write because there's something about it, the flavor,
The
the burst of goodness, yumminess, brings me, it just takes me out of my mind for a minute, you know?
Yeah.
And also
Yeah.
it's a serotonin rush, which doesn't hurt, but all that good.
Yeah, but you're right. Like the senses really help. And like me, for example, I need a blanket. Like I'm gonna show you guys. Like I always write with this blanket, because I need to be like cozy and like physically comfortable, and also have music, and that's how I calm myself down enough to just like let the creativity flow. But sometimes it's hard even with
It
all that.
is. It is hard. And I think the fact that you keep doing it, even though it's hard, is why you're going to be successful. Because
Thank
if
you.
it's hard and then we shut down and walk away, nothing happens, right? But
Yeah,
you've created these beautiful opportunities to feel snuggly and warm, and you know
yeah,
what those sort of tools are that you need. And
yeah.
for me, like I'm a little afraid of fire right now because we just survived the Los Angeles fires. So I'm using an electric candle um,
Yeah.
for a little ambiance here. But it makes me feel cozy. It creates kind of
Yeah.
a space that's comforting. I don't
It's
have
the self-soothing thing that you said in the book.
yeah, exactly. These are little miniature built-in ways to self-soothe. And
Yes. And something that, like we were talking about music. My books are about a pop star, a teen pop star. So like a lot of my audience are from girls, and they from girl over like hairstyles, Shawn Mendes, and all that. So I have a very close relationship with the this community, the fun girls. And I think this is a very clear example of how music can help us self-soothe,
yes,
because like the artists are not there, like we feel like they are, and to us they are friends, but they are not. And I think that's the power of music. Like we found a way to use music to calm ourselves down and to give ourselves this comfort that we needed so much, and that there's nobody else that is going to give it to us.
and it's so true. And it's like the first thing I do when I'm in a mood that I want to change is I change my music. I put
Yeah.
music that will bring me to the place I want to feel. And by the way, sometimes I like to feel dark and I turn on a dark song. I love
Yes.
Daft Punk.
Yeah.
Like I love Fiona Apple's one of my favorite singers of all time. I love how gritty and raw and dark and soulful and rich and textured and deep all
Yeah.
of those voices and stories are. But that's a
It's
choice. It's
healing.
a choice to go there, right? So I think like
Yeah.
I think in the paradigm that we're talking about, there's this level of choice where we're not sort of subject to our feelings all the time. We can actively choose in moments where we're not feeling the way we want to feel differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a wonderful tool to do that. And
Yeah.
the more, well, so similar to what we were discussing about neural pathways, if you turn on the same songs over and over and
Yeah.
over again to access certain emotions and match them and partner
Yeah.
your feelings with music, I do feel like, scientifically it would make sense that your brain would then go faster and faster to the place that you're trying to access.
That's what I do with the writing, actually. Remember that I said that when I have writer's block, like I put on some music, is
Yeah.
because it brings me there to that feeling in the book.
So you've patterned it in now.
Yeah.
Patterned it in. And I think we can do that with a lot of our feelings. We can practice even, I take a lot of time to practice feeling peaceful when I'm
Hmm.
not under duress, like when I'm not in a state of stress, so that when I
Hmm.
am, I can access it more easily.
Yes.
It helps,
Yeah.
I think, to kind of build in moments of your day, whether it's 5 minutes, for me it's longer, but I've worked up to that, where you are without time and without
Hmm.
responsibility, where you can just let things go,
Yeah.
let things be,
You
and
can just exist.
just exist without any expectations. And then
Yes.
the day, whatever chaos transpires between my bookends, I feel like I'm able to handle with more resilience. I'm able to tackle things a little bit
Yeah.
more efficiently because that piece is already in my bones. I've already sort of
Hmm.
absorbed and internalized the pause. So I can access it more easily when things get hairy.
Yeah. Most people think that self-care is like, doing something like skincare or something physical, but I think it's the silence actually.
It's all the things. It's what feels good to you, right? So like your version of
Yeah.
self-care may not resemble mine. People need to figure out for themselves what that looks like. For me,
Hmm.
it's a whole lot of things. And on any given day, it might be different. I might be choosing a different thing from my arsenal, of what it means for me to care for myself. So it could be what I'm eating, it could be, on a very extravagant day, a massage, but, the self-care could be creating a boundary.
Yeah.
Could be celebrating myself when I feel like I don't have the right to yet. I mean, that's a form of
Hmm.
self-care. My book, as you know,
Yeah.
was published this past week, and I found myself postponing celebrating until I get more momentum going. And it's like, well, that's not very kind and
Yeah.
caring to myself. Like, I did this thing, I created something and put it into the world.
You have
And
the right to celebrate.
we have the right to celebrate anything we want to at any time. Like, we should just
Yeah.
be celebrating all the time, being alive,
Yeah.
being, having a day where we don't trip and fall and scrape our knee. Like,
Yeah.
we can choose to celebrate anything at any time. So,
Yeah.
our version of what it means to care for ourselves, I think, is very individual. And from day to day, it's going to change. Like today, my version of self care is talking to you because this is a huge gift to me. And that's going to be to eat a really delicious lunch that I'm so excited about. There's simple things. It doesn't have to be like we're doing, a grand spa day. I mean, that I do love a grand
Yeah.
spa day, by the way. Don't get me wrong. If anyone wants to gift me a grand spa day, I will show up 15 minutes early and have my robe and slippers on. But really self-care, I think for me, 95% of the time is an attitude. And
Yeah.
it's the version of life I'm telling myself is true for me at any given moment of time. So it's
Yeah.
saying things to myself and my internal narrative and dialogue that are really kind and forgiving and loving and giving myself some grace and
Yeah.
compassion and leeway to be human. What could be a greater source of self-care than allowing yourself to be human?
Yeah, and going back on the sleep thing, because to me that's one of the best ways to like give ourselves grace, allow ourselves to sleep. But some people, like a lot of people actually, um, see like sacrificing sleep as something like kind of attach their self-worth with sleep in a very bad way, and think about someone who sleep that that person is lazy. And on the other hand, like if you're sacrificing your sleep, you're being your self-worth, you have more self-worth, just because I don't agree with, I don't subscribe to that anymore, but I know a lot of people do. So talk a little bit more about that, because I love that in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, it's scientifically, that's just not how it works. So every single human being needs a certain number of hours of sleep, right? Like we all have our go-to number of hours. For one person, it might be 6. For another person, it might be 10. We don't need to judge whatever it is. There's no better number of hours of sort of as a baseline for sleep.
Hmm.
It's individual. And it's important, I think, to know that there are going to be days where you need more sleep or less sleep because
Yeah.
of what you've been through, what you've eaten, where you are hormonally, at that a certain time of a month, what you're undergoing in terms of stress and work expectations. Maybe your mother just died and you are processing so much that your body needs more sleep. So all of these energy expenditures need to be accounted for, right? But we all have a
Hmm.
certain number of hours of sleep that our body requires on a daily basis. And what we know about science is that sleep is deeply affected to mental health. So
Hmm.
you cannot really maximize productivity and ensure mental stability and emotional soundness if you're not getting enough hours of sleep, right? Sleep is what rejuvenates us. It's when we heal, it's when we process, it's when we detox on all the levels, in all the ways. So if we're shortchanging ourselves certain number of hours of sleep because we think we're being more productive by sleeping fewer hours, it's actually just not true. Like from a scientific perspective, you're depleting yourself of the reserves that will help fuel you during your waking hours. So what I find is for me personally, 8 is my golden number of hours of sleep. Like more often than not, my body requires almost exactly 8 hours of sleep. It's been this way
Hmm.
since I was little. Some days I sleep 7 and wake up energized, but 8 is kind of my go-to. What I find is if I don't get 7 or 8 hours of sleep, I'm sluggish, my mental capacity is diminished, my just level of sharpness and cleverness and my reactivity to think like everything is transformed. Everything
And
is
I think some people just get used to it. You know, they don't realize that is affecting them that way. They just think that that's their personality.
right. Well, we get used to things and we override our body's needs and the clues and signals of our body so many times over that we actually think that what we need is different from what we actually need because we've convinced ourselves that what we need is what we feel like we should need.
Yes.
And what we feel like we should need is different from, in many cases, what we actually need. So, like, I would really like to be a person who requires 4 hours of sleep. Like, that would be awesome if I could get 4 more hours in my day. It's just not reality. Like, I'm a person who requires 8 hours of sleep. So, there's no sort of mental negotiation I can do to convince myself that I'm a 4 hour a night sleeper. If I
Yeah.
sleep 4 hours a night for years on end, which by the way, I did when I was an insomniac. Okay, so like I actually have very real experience with not doing the thing my body needs in real life. It backfires because what happens is our body produces massive amounts of cortisol to
Mm-hmm.
compensate for the fact that we're not rested. Our body
Mm-hmm.
interprets that lack of rest as stress because it's stressful for the body, right? Like
Yeah.
when we're not replenished and restored and healed and detoxified, it actually puts a huge strain on our body. And then we produce massive amounts of cortisol and adrenaline to push through the fatigue, right? So we think we actually are fine because we're functional, but what's fueling us is adrenaline. It's not actual energy. It's not the
Mm-hmm.
reserves that our body requires to function healthily. And then
Mm-hmm.
we become addicted to the cortisol. We become addicted to the adrenaline. And then we create stress and anxiety because, as we know, what we habituate to, what's familiar, tends to be our default programming. The
Yeah.
pattern that we've accustomed to is the easiest one to slip into. So if I'm running on fumes, but I've got all of this cortisol and adrenaline that's moving me forward, then when those levels start to come down, I might create a scenario in my life that artificially, well, not artificially, it is technically producing these, chemical reactions. But in other words, I might fabricate some kind of artificial drama or, story that I'm telling myself or some fear-based notion to get that adrenaline going again, to get that
Mm-hmm.
cortisol rush again, because that's what my body knows it
Yeah.
has habituated to for survival, right?
Yeah. And I think we as society, we are collectively having this problem. Like we are addicted to uh problems, you know, like we can't just sit and appreciate. And I saw the one quote today on Instagram saying something like this. It was a photo of a very humble family somewhere in a poor country, and it was saying, "You're living someone else's dream life." You know, but we don't, yeah, but we don't like, we don't think about this. We don't stop to appreciate. And I think one of the reasons is that we're so like biologically addicted to stress
Yes.
that we don't know anymore how to go back to this state, you know, of
Well, what if
just,
we practice being addicted to feeling good?
yeah.
What if
We
as an
should.
experiment for 5 days, we let ourselves be addicted to positivity? Imagine how
Yeah,
that would change our lives,
we
right? Like
should
right
definitely.
now, instead of thinking, oh, my book, who knows, I wrote this, who knows if anyone will read it, what if the thought that if that's my go-to thought, what if my thought was, this is amazing. I have a book
Yeah,
in the world, and the people who are meant to read it are going to find it. Somehow
yeah,
it's going to be given to the person who gives it to a person who gives it to them, and it's going to change their lives, and they're going to contact me, and they're going to share their story with me, and I'm going to feel this deep connection with them because I know that the things I've written have had this profound transformative effect on their experience being on this planet. I mean, I just decided to completely change my
yeah,
narrative, right? So it's like, even if we're used to a certain feeling or way of thinking or being in the world, we can take control of our lives.
yeah,
If I'm thinking right now, oh, this afternoon, it's raining outside, I'm probably going to be really wet and cold. I can also choose to dance in the rain. I mean, this is a
yeah.
metaphor in this moment.
But
But,
it
but
works.
literally, It's raining. I can either choose to be cold and trembling, or I can just dance in the rain in my rain boots.
Yeah.
Have a great time. The choice is ours.
Yeah. It's all everything. We think we don't have a choice, but we do.
We think we don't have a choice because as children, so much felt out of our control. And then we
Yeah.
continue to believe as we get older that we're just subject to life and we're subject to the world and we're subject to our emotions.
Yeah.
I think there's almost kind of like an unconscious victimization, that I myself have been prey to at different points in my life where I think, well, this is so hard. This is very hard, and it is. And it is hard. But then we get to change it. Then we get to make
Yeah.
a decision for it to feel a little bit easier. And how we
Yeah.
do that is by self-soothing and allowing it to be what it is, and then talking to ourselves the way we would talk to our children. And then sometimes taking uncomfortable action steps before we even feel ready to get to a different place. If I'm afraid of the rain, the best thing for me to do might be to put on my rain boots and my raincoat and go outside in it. Even though it
Yeah.
might feel more comfortable for me to sit inside by a warm fire and hide, which is, by the way, what I'm going to do. No, but this is a metaphor. This is a metaphor. Sometimes we need to take the action steps to practice being uncomfortable in chosen scenarios. In other words, like we often, like you were saying, feel subject to things. But what if we decided at different points, this is an opportunity for me to be in control by choosing to put myself in an uncomfortable
Yeah.
position, and then practice self-soothing in the midst of that discomfort.
Yeah. Oh, that you said something, well, a word, a magical word there. Practice. I think we are so scared of discomfort because we don't practice enough. Like athletes know this very well. Like they don't improve, they don't get better if they don't put themselves in that discomfort day after day. And I think like most people, we don't have this knowledge, maybe, that courage and success, it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from this practice of being uncomfortable until we get used to it.
And you know this as an author, Larissa, it is a
Yeah.
highly vulnerable process putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
And we have to practice over and over again being rejected, right?
Yes.
And then soothing ourselves when it feels really icky, when people don't like us or like our work or say no or just don't respond.
Yeah.
Like it's icky feeling. And we get to experience ourselves, be uncomfortable, and then move through it to the other side. Dr. Becky Kennedy talks a lot about repair in relationships, especially in like parent-child dynamics, where she says like the biggest fallacy is that we have to do everything right and be,
Hmm.
on top of everything as parents and perfecting it and winning at being, winning at the parenting game, so to speak. It's such an unrealistic standard. And so she kind of frees us from this paradigm by saying the most important thing in the relationship is repair. You're going to mess up over and over again. And then you come to your child and you say, wow, I made a mistake. Like, I did not handle this the way I wanted to. And
Hmm.
I apologize. And I hope that you forgive me and that we can move on. It's repair. So we need to be doing that with ourselves day in, day out,
Yeah.
the repair piece. And that to me is the biggest form of practice. Like when we're
Yeah.
into ourselves, when we have tricky thoughts that make us feel really gross and bad, we can repair, right? Like,
Yeah. The perfectionist in me will say, oh, this is wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. But actually, I should just, acknowledge that this happened and do the repair.
absolutely. I mean, like I said, judgment doesn't get us anywhere. It just holds
Yeah.
us back, it suffocates us, it imprisons us, and it keeps us from moving forward. And the thing about perfectionism is, as we know, it's not real. Your
Hmm.
concept of perfect may actually be really uninteresting to me. I may be completely bored by whatever it is on your checklist that you get right. And so that's an
Hmm.
interesting thing to realize too, is that when we're holding ourselves to certain standards and we're accountable to like this perfectionistic ideal that we've constructed in our own mind, It's fake anyway.
Yeah.
No one else might agree with you. So who are you to judge yourself? The
Yeah.
very first podcast, actually, it was the second podcast interview I ever did in my life for my company. This is a story I've never told anyone. May I share this story with you, Liz?
Okay.
Okay. This was the second podcast I had ever done. I was so nervous. And they asked a question out the gate that made me feel very vulnerable. And so instead of performing, and instead of being on, instead of like representing myself and my company in a way that I felt proud of, I just was myself. And when the interview was over, I cried a lot of tears in the parking lot. I called my business partner and I said, I have a favor to ask you. I'd like you to contact the producer of this podcast, and I would like you to ask them to pull it, please, from the lineup. This was an epic failure. I'm so embarrassed. I did not represent myself well. I did not represent the company. There was nothing magical or sparkly about it. It was really boring and uninteresting. This was a the name of the podcast was The Skinny Confidential. Okay. So
Hmm.
my business partner calls me back and says, I'm so sorry, they can't pull it. They won't pull it. So I just went on with my life and just thought, I'll just ignore it. Like I'll pretend it never happened. I totally forgot about the podcast, moved on with my life. Got a call from my business partner a few months later when it aired. It was the number one podcast in America for health and wellness for 3 consecutive weeks. It was like this podcast, then Deepak Chopra, and Oprah Winfrey. Little old me. No
Oh my
one
God.
knew who I was. Okay. I had cried. I was so embarrassed. The thing that resonated with people was that I was real. I was my authentic self. It was so imperfect. I felt like I was boring people to tears. I felt so unimpressive. And the big lesson for me there, the biggest takeaway was I'm not here to impress people, even myself, right? So it's like
Yeah.
we play this game with ourselves, or we're trying to impress ourselves so that we feel safe and valuable, and we're immune
Yeah.
to criticism because when we fear rejection, we want to make sure that we are going to survive and feel okay. So in order to stave off any potential rejection, we attempt to perfect ourselves. And in a way, as a professional or a writer or a singer or whatever, you also can attempt to perfect your performance in the world. Because
Yeah.
what? Nobody wants a performance. They want
Yes.
you. At the end of the day, all the things that we think are going to make us feel safe, they're just imprisoning us.
Yeah.
They're prisoners then to a false standard that isn't even
That is so
real
true.
and that other people don't care about. Other people, by the way, want permission to feel human. They too want to feel messy and have bad hair days. If
Yes.
you're busy perfecting your hair, no one else is going to feel freedom to have bad hair there
Yeah.
around you,
If
right?
we all normalize, being normal, I think it would be so great.
Yes. And just talk about it. Like,
Yes.
this is what I'm struggling with. Or,
Yeah.
I have this fear that I'm not gonna be received well in the world.
Yeah.
What
And
do you
to me, I love your book title. I think it was great, and it represents the book very well. And I know my answer, but I want to ask you, what does this represent to you? Being the boss of you, um, what does it mean to you to be the boss of you? Because to me, just giving you a spoiler, to me, it's that, like
I want
realizing
to
that
hear you. I
nobody
want to hear your
cares.
response because you're my reader. So what does it mean for you? Like when you read
So
that,
yeah,
I,
to me, that's what represents, like, realize that nobody else care as much as you think they do, and really decide to do what you want to do, and also heal yourself. Like that's also this part of like really taking care of yourself, but mostly like just realizing that nobody cares about you, and nobody's going to build anything for you. Like if you want something out of life, you have to be your own boss. You have to take this step and say, I want that, I'm going to go after that, because nobody's going to do that for you.
yeah, and I mean, I think like in a sense, I'll just modify that just ever so slightly, and it's so beautifully and eloquently said, and I agree with everything. But I think people do care, but I think everyone's very busy trying to survive their own
In
life.
their own lives.
So it's like, I know you care. You're showing up to this beautiful conversation, But at the end of the day, like you've got books to write, you've got things to do, right? So
Yeah.
it's extraordinary that you made time for this and you asked to do this interview with me. Yeah, it means so much to me because you're a caring soul and you care. But I think that sometimes we exaggerate in our mind the
Yeah.
degree to which other people are thinking about us. And we get
Yes.
terrified because we're putting so much pressure on ourselves based on their impressions and feedback and what we think they're thinking and our perceptions of their mentality about us. It's like, it's all fictitious anyway. I have no idea what you're thinking about me. I don't know what you're feeling is right now. Like, it's actually not my business. My business
Yeah.
is to be me, to show up as real and honest and vulnerable as I can. And your interpretation of me and this experience, it's yours. I don't get to
Yes.
micromanage or control it. I couldn't even if I tried, right, Larissa? Like
Yeah.
you're the boss of your life, right? So I think people care, but I think sometimes we put so much stress and pressure on ourselves because we think that people are thinking things about us. It's like they've moved on. By the way, even if someone sends, a nasty comment on Instagram or posts something that is displeasing or hurtful or unkind or insensitive, they've moved on a moment later. Like they're
Yeah.
drinking their coffee, they're walking their dog, they're picking their kid up from school, right? Like you might be dwelling on it. And you might be trying to manage the experience of absorbing that feedback, but they're not. They're not thinking about you anymore. So
Yeah.
I agree with you in that regard. And I think what I meant by this title, and I actually do pray that it lands differently for different people, because if it does, it means that I've done something right. I've empowered other people to be the boss of their own lives, which is
Yeah.
the point of writing this, right? So there's so many different aspects to life. There's our emotional life, spiritual, psychological, mental, our tangible, physical lives, right? What I want is for people to know that they're in charge of all of it. If you don't
Yeah.
like something about your life, you can change it. If your
Yes.
circumstances aren't pleasing you, you can take control. It might take a lot of planning and effort. And I know there are resources involved in certain practical life changes that we make, but ultimately, you're in charge of your life. You are in control, and you have every right to be as authentic as possible in living your life, both in who you are, what you say, and what you do.
Yeah.
Because when you the grand total of all of that means you're the boss of you, that you're in
Yeah.
charge.
And
And
some
that's a
people,
gift to others, actually. When you empower yourself to be in charge of your life, you empower the people around you to do the same.
yes, so much. But what I was going to say is that I think a lot of people use like the world as an excuse to don't take the responsibility in their hands, and until they do, they will never be able to change anything. So um, like having a day job, for example, some people, like a lot of people, see that as a jail. Like they see that as something that is preventing them from going after their dreams.
Right.
But I think it's just an excuse that they give to themselves, because it's very scary as well to take the control of your own life, and go for something that you want. Because you might never get it, you might be rejected and criticized and all that. So it's very comfortable not to be the boss of your life and just
Feel
say that the
powerless.
world is the one controlling you.
Yeah, I mean, I think every time we defer responsibility, in a way, we feel then less in control, which temporarily makes us feel safe because we get to be a victim, but in the long run,
Yeah.
like creates kind of like an unfulfilling life that might
Yeah.
not be as meaningful and purposeful and joyful and satiating and peaceful as we desire it to be. So it's kind of this, it's almost like this vicious cycle because in the short run, it's like, well, it's not my fault. I'm out of
Yeah.
control, powerless. But in the long run, that powerlessness is what makes us actually like shrink into a version of ourselves that isn't fulfilling our greatest potential. And
Yeah.
so, one might argue that being a parent is its own version of prison if you let it be, right? Like, I was a singer and songwriter before I had my son Max. And then when he was born, decided it was all or nothing. And I couldn't go to the studio and I couldn't record and I couldn't perform. And I had to say goodbye to my band because I was a mom and it was my 100%, full-time job at the time. And it just feels like it doesn't have to be all or nothing, right? Like
Yeah.
we get to decide what the
Yeah.
parameters of our lives are. And if that means stealing moments to write in the bathroom, do it. Like
Yeah.
my grandmother loved to read growing up, and she always told me that, as a child, she would read under the covers with a flashlight, and her mom would come in and say, like, you've really got to sleep. So she would go to the bathroom and pretend to have an upset stomach because it's the only place where they couldn't say to her, you can't read anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I go to my bathroom with an pretend upset stomach all the time to to have a moment of peace and solitude where I get to create something special. I do it
Yeah.
while I'm cooking dinner. I sit in my car on the way
Yeah.
to get I take my kids to school every morning and pick them up. And on those commutes, I get a lot done creatively. I'm recording little voice memos into my phone. I'm singing melodies. It's a
Yeah.
combination for me of writing for the books and creating melodies for music. It's okay that you don't necessarily have access to the life you want in this moment in time. You can work toward that. But you
Hmm.
always have the power to choose moments where you get to activate the part of you that feels alive. And it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be hours a day at first. You can work your way
Yes.
to the life that is the most fulfilling version of reality possible for you. So in a way, we get to decide how clever and how strategic we're going to be about stealing moments of time. And
Yeah.
it can be small at first, and we can work our way towards a bigger and bigger version of, beauty, as we define it on our terms. But I just want to say one other thing, Larissa. You might have all the resources in the world and all the time in the world, but you're still not doing the thing you want to do. You might not have a day job. You might be between jobs, and it's the perfect time
Yeah.
for what you want to do, but you're holding yourself back because the prison isn't the day job. It's the thought that I'm not good enough, or I'm
Yeah.
not going to get what I want, or if I try this and
Yes.
fail, then what? Then I'm nothing. Then I have nothing going for me, or
Yeah.
I won't have anything to look forward to, or it will confirm that I'm the failure I always suspected I was, or that my parents told
Yeah.
me I was, right? Well, when it's in our imagination, we get to hold on to the hope that we're going to have the happy ending we dream of versus
Yeah.
experiencing, reality. What I would say to that is that it's not, there isn't one ending to your story, right? Like there are going to be thousands of endings and beginnings, right? So like I wrote one book and then I wrote a different book. And then I tried something, creatively with my music and then went in a different direction, right? And so like we get to keep reinventing the wheel. If something
Yeah.
doesn't work out the way you imagined it would, or if a door closes or someone says no or the timing isn't right, you get to start again. It's not over for
Yeah.
you there, right? So
Yeah.
the story you can tell yourself when things don't work out exactly the way you planned or wanted to, it doesn't have to be, I'm a failure, this didn't work out, I'm never going to be a success. It can be, wow, at this moment in time, this angle wasn't
Didn't
exactly
work.
on mark. So now I can use the information I've learned from this
Yes.
experience to apply it to my next effort or my next project. And I will see how that evolves, right? And
Yeah.
just continue to build on learning experiences because there's no ending. By the way,
Yes.
think that there's this end place where it's like, oh, I'm a published author, or I got a record deal, or like I became a parent, or I got married, and that you're gonna have all these juicy feelings and you're gonna be glowing and basking in the joy and the victory of it. Like that's not how it works. At least that's not how it works with me. For me, it's like there's a few minutes where I'm excited, and then I'm on
Yeah.
to the next thing, or it's
Yeah.
like there's a problem now that I've created for myself, for my life. In some ways, I like to create problems for myself to solve, right? Like, I want to
Hmm.
write a whole different kind of book that is a challenge for me. So that's a self-inflicted problem. Um, but again, like, because we're always choosing our experience, you can even do all the things you dream of and still not be satisfied.
Yeah.
Or you can just consider it all a huge, ever evolving learning curve and always be satisfied with wherever you are
Yes.
at the moment, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no guarantee that you get to your end goal or not happy anyway, because happiness is a
Yeah.
choice.
As a writer, this is my new trick. Like every day, like every sentence, I get to celebrate. Because before it was like every book, every published book.
Mm,
But I'm trying to just give myself the credit because I realize it, and that's why I'm saying this. When I wrote my first book, I thought it would be just the one. I didn't think I would ever have another idea. And then it came to the second, and then the third, and now I have like four other ideas. So I'm like, okay, this is never gonna stop. So I have to like start celebrating the small steps because I'm never gonna get to the end and like get to celebrate all my books. So yeah, I think it's a practice. We have to practice giving ourselves credit every day. Otherwise, like there's no finish line.
Absolutely. And by the way, that is so brilliant. And it's kindness. It's kindness to yourself, right? To
Yeah,
let yourself be happy where you are. What greater kindness can you give yourself than to
yeah,
decide that it's okay to be happy at this moment in time, however you're feeling, whatever's going on, whatever hasn't
yeah,
happened or gone on. Like that's a
yeah,
great gift. That's compassion. That's great.
yeah. It
And
took
I
me a long
love that.
time.
And also, by the way, studies have shown that it's more effective in terms of productivity in the long run.
Yeah,
Because these reward systems we've set up where we get the goodie after we
yeah.
create something and are at the finish line don't actually motivate us for
Exactly.
longevity.
That was the lesson actually. I didn't learn this the good way. I learned this the hard way because I was having so much writer's block that I wasn't making any progress at all, and I had to start digging and see why I wasn't being able to write. And I realized it was that like I published three books that I didn't celebrate. Like, and then my body was like, okay, so if we're never gonna get there, why am I putting all this work?
Is there
It
something that
doesn't.
is there something that you tell yourself or when you're celebrating just being alive and being in the moment, doing your craft and engaging your work, what is it that you're saying or doing ritualistically to activate that?
I dance.
Oh,
I dance to Taylor Swift sometimes.
we love her. She's so festive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. I snack.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
We all
another
have our ways.
thing.
You are the boss of you. You get to
Yeah.
dance. I'm the boss of me. I get to snack.
Yeah, we all do
I do I do some
sister.
dancing too.
Yeah. Let me go back to my questions because I had so many and in the end I didn't okay, advocating for yourself because that is so important, to defend yourself and your boundaries, and it's very uncomfortable as well. But what advice can you give to people pleasers actually?
I mean, I think the first step in self-advocacy is not waiting to feel comfortable taking action on your own behalf. So many of us feel like we're going to have this feeling like we're ready suddenly, or we have peace, or we feel totally confident. But that's not
Yes.
always realistic. We may not feel confident, but
Yeah.
it still may be in our best interest to advocate for ourselves, right? So getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, advocating for yourself, I think is so important because very rarely does it feel good. It can,
Yeah.
there are poignant moments where it's empowering and we feel confident, but like more often than not, for a people pleaser, it's uncomfortable. We're afraid
Yeah.
of negative feedback. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. We don't want anyone to resent us. We don't want to be a burden, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's important to take action before you feel ready sometimes. And then,
Because you never feel ready probably.
I mean, I wouldn't more 99% of the time, I don't feel ready. What I do is I
Yeah.
do the thing I know that I need to do for myself. And then I comfort myself when it feels really yucky and uncomfortable because I'm afraid of how people are going to receive my message, right? And
Yeah.
that's where the self-soothing piece is so paramount and so non-negotiable because there's a lot in life we have to do before we feel ready, before we're comfortable
Yeah.
doing it. I mean, very few of us wake up empowered to take action on our own behalf day after day after day, especially when we're dealing with tricky dynamics like family members,
Yeah.
or people with expectations in our workplace, or our children. We don't want to disappoint people. We want people to be
Yeah.
happy with us, right? And so sometimes we hold ourselves back because we're putting too much energy on what people are going to say and do in response
Yeah.
versus doing the thing we know in our hearts that we need to do for ourselves. And part of how I motivate myself to move forward is to not in a punishing way, not in a way that inflicts a sense of, self-torture, but in a way that illuminates my path. I draw upon incidences from the past where I have not chosen to effectively advocate for myself and it hasn't worked out well, right? So
Yeah.
I think about times where I decided not to be my own advocate because I was scared or I wanted to please other people or put them first and didn't prioritize my own needs and desires and priorities. And it didn't go the way I had hoped it would. And maybe the backlash was physical, maybe it was mental, maybe it was emotional. But I think about those incidences and it does help drive action. Now, when you're recalling the past where you haven't advocated for, I was going to say where you failed to advocate for yourself, and that was why I was stumbling because I do not like that word. So when you have not chosen to effectively advocate for yourself,
Yeah.
it's so important to remove judgment from the equation, right? Because sometimes we think that judgment is how we'll move forward and progress. Like we need to judge ourselves and be really harsh with ourselves and critical so that we don't make the same mistakes moving forward. I don't feel like that's necessary. And in fact, it hasn't ever helped me in the past to effectively create change and make progress in my life. It just makes me feel miserable and it lowers my self-esteem and it triggers the thought patterns of like, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I
Yeah.
should have, I could have. And it's not instructive, it's not useful. So what I'm talking about is in a very healthy way that's full of compassion and love and grace and patience with yourself. Think about times where you didn't advocate for yourself and go, wow, like that didn't work out very well for me. Now is an opportunity to take control of my life and make a different choice, right? That it
Yeah.
may not lead to an outcome that you desire, right? Because we never have control over how people are going to respond to our self-advocacy. But
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. We
And we
always,
do feel better. Like, even if the person doesn't react well, we feel like proud of ourselves, you know?
yes. Well,
And I think it's and I think this feeling of, being proud of yourself, that's what creates our self-worth, you know? And the more self-worth you think you have, the easier it's going to be for you to keep advocating for yourself. So it's important that you do that, so you can gain these self-worth points with yourself
I think
and
that's
make it
so
easier.
brilliant. I think it's so good.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an area I've struggled so much with. Everything I write about in the book has sprung from my own inner turmoil and having to troubleshoot over many, many years and try different tools and strategies because it's been so challenging for me in these areas. And with the self-advocacy piece, I feel like if we're not giving ourselves some grace to be human, then everything just feels harder, right? So
Yeah.
this doesn't have to be a perfect thing. It might be messy. You might not say the perfect words when you're advocating for yourself. It might feel sloppy. You might need to revise what you said. You might need to apologize even. There's the repair piece coming back into play.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We can't expect ourselves at any time to do anything perfectly, right? And that's not the point. The point is just to show up and be authentic and be honest and state your needs. And if you want the raise and feel like you deserve the raise, ask for the raise. Ask for the raise in your family, right? Like my version of a raise right now in my own family dynamic is holding my children accountable to things I know they're ready to do and aren't doing lately. And I'm picking up the
Hmm.
slack and it's wasting my time and energy and I'm not empowering them to be
Yes.
responsible humans, right?
Yeah.
So that's like the raise I'm going to give myself in my family life is taking back my time by continuing to reinforce good, healthy habits for other people, right? So
Yeah.
there's many versions of this, but whatever it is you're asking for, just know that it doesn't have to be a perfect delivery and that you get to have a second shot at it if it doesn't work out the first time. Right? Like in life, communication can be messy, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Like we don't have to spend weeks crafting a perfect monologue because guess what? You might craft that monologue and people don't respond to you the way you want them to anyway, right?
Yes.
But you have then been authentic. You've then stated your
Yeah.
needs, and it feels really good to have your own back. Like it
Yeah.
actually, we think it feels better to please other people because we're so afraid of like not being loved, which I think is many of us being triggered, into childhood experiences of wondering if we're still going to be loved and will mommy love us and will daddy approve of us if we don't do this thing perfectly or if we say this thing and get negative feedback, like we're going to feel crap. All those things, it's like all of that floods to the surface. But guess what? It feels really good to take care of yourself. It feels
Yeah.
even better to take care of yourself than it does to try to please everyone around you. Even, many of us are walking around trying to please strangers we've never met.
Yeah.
It's like it's ludicrous when you really think about it. We have these sort of fictitious groups of people too that we're trying to please. We don't
Yeah.
even know who they are sometimes. And I think
Yeah.
for me, it's almost like I create reasons to punish myself and to think
Yeah.
I'm not deserving of love.
Yeah.
And then because of that, I failed to advocate for, there's that stupid word again, but stupid's a stupid word too. But I don't care for myself because I've created reasons why I'm not enough and created these impossible standards. Like at the end of
Yes.
the day, all we can do is speak our truth.
Yeah.
That's our only job, just to show
Yeah.
up and be real with ourselves and other people. They can take us or
Yeah.
leave us, and then we get to love ourselves through it.
Yeah. Let me see if I have more questions. Oh, redefining your self-concept. I thought that was so interesting because sometimes like identities we get these labels and we turn them into our identity and and then we realize that we're not that at all.
Yeah.
And tell us about that. Like what could you say to someone who is struggling with their identity and wants to redefine themselves?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you get to decide who you are. No one else gets to make that decision for you. So many of us have absorbed the influences of our family and culture and society that we don't even know who we are. And so in the book, I really try to peel back the layers of just what it means to be human so that people can begin to ask themselves the questions of what feels true for them and what feels right for them. Because it's hard to navigate your dreams if you've already decided who you are based on a paradigm that isn't even applicable anymore, based on maybe who people thought you were as a child or who people told you were as a child.
Yeah.
So we get to reinvent our self-concept based on who we are now, and that may
Yeah.
change, right? In
Yeah.
a day, in 10 years' time, like hopefully we're continuing to evolve and rethink and sort of reimagine our self-concepts. But the starting point is you. It's not the people around you. It's not the voices that you hear, telling you who you should be or who it's practical to be or what will make sense in the world or what will look good in society. The starting point is your own gut feeling, your inner knowing, your truth, right? So I
Yeah.
think if people take nothing else away from this conversation, it's important to understand that ultimately you're in charge and you're in control of your identity. And our job is more to peel away what isn't authentically us than it is to recreate ourselves because we are like wonderful and we're innately, many of us, all of us are innately joyful and innately creative. I mean, everyone is creative, whether you're a dentist or an artist, all work is creative work. And so our job here on this planet isn't to sort of reinvent ourselves. It's just to strip away all the gook and all of the assumptions and all of the preconceived notions and influences that have kept us from experiencing who we truly are.
Yeah, that's so true. Sometimes my mom sees me in on videos, on social media, and she's like, "I don't recognize you." And I am always like, "Yeah, like I've always been like that." But growing up, they kind of label me as a shy kid, and
Right.
I went with it, and I never knew that. In fact, I'm not. I'm just like observant and like I wait everybody to speak so I can speak, but I was never shy. And so yeah, I feel it. I felt that chapter very deeply.
Or you may have been shy yesterday, but you've busted out of your shell today. My daughter this morning, all morning, I was at an assembly for my kids at their school, where my daughter was sharing her work in the classroom for part of it. And last year, she did not do a single share. This year, every single week, she wants to be on that stage. And so we evolve, you know?
Yeah,
And ultimately, it's important to rethink those primary influences and to question them and say,
yeah,
oh, wow, like maybe as a kid I was really good at math. People I was assumed I was going to be a mathematician, so I never even allowed myself to explore creativity in this certain way, you know, or
yeah,
I was a great athlete, so my parents signed me up for 15 sports. Really, I just wanted to paint, you know?
yeah,
And so as adults, we get to question the layers of influences that were sort of thrust upon us and strip away layer by layer so that we can really identify at our core who we are and who we were meant to be. Oh,
yeah. You have to explore, I think. We
absolutely.
shouldn't. Yeah, as adults, we should explore and not just accept the labels that they put on us when we were little.
Absolutely. And you can be a shy person who writes, and you can be an outgoing person who writes, and you can be
Yeah,
part introvert, part extrovert. There's no one way to be when you approach anything in life, right? Like there's
yeah,
so many different sides to me and my personality too. And
yeah,
nobody gets to put us in a box. But more importantly, we should never put ourselves in a box. It is such a
yeah,
crime to limit ourselves by saying, I'm this or I'm that. You know, it's like,
yeah,
I'm all the things at different
yeah,
points in my life, right? And that's okay. It's not
yeah.
just okay. It's why I've explored so many different careers. It's why I've
It's okay to change.
absolutely, and it's important to acknowledge that you are many different things, and that
Yeah,
if there's a word that you're attaching to yourself, or ascribing to your personality because it makes you feel good about yourself, then fantastic, use that. But
yeah,
if to your favor, in your favor,
yeah,
to your benefit. But if you find that words that have always been used to describe you, or that peers use to describe you, or that you use to describe yourself, feel limiting and like you're in a cage, it's time to bust out of those boxes because you're more
true.
than the words that you choose to define yourself by, and you're definitely more than how other people choose to describe you.
Yeah, you are the boss of you.
You're the boss of you.
Thank you so much for this talk. It was so good. The book is amazing. Everybody should check it out. So healing, so empowering, and I thank you, for writing such a masterpiece because, like, I think we need this kind of content so much. Like, this should be. That's why I created the account, the Best Version of Myself movement, because there's not enough of this type of content on the internet, and people are not aware, that they have all these problems, but they don't even know. And now, if we share this knowledge, they will feel a lot more empowered and, change their lives, become the boss of themselves. So thank you for sharing all your lessons in this book, this amazing book. Thank you for talking with me, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Larissa. If anyone wants to check the book out, it's on Amazon. Just search for You're the Boss of You. The workbook is on my personal site, helloshauna.com, and people are welcome to, now that I understand Instagram a little bit, people are welcome to send me messages about their experience with the book or questions they have too. I'd love to receive feedback. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was so meaningful to me, and you're just a beautiful spirit and soul. And I'm really going to miss watching you smile for the rest of the day. Like, I'm going to anchor
Oh.
the image of you smiling into my heart, into my mind's eye, so I can refer back to it when I'm having a rough moment.
Oh, it was lovely to talk to you.